A Captain and a Madman by RazielZonoran. Chapter 6, The Doctor and the Listener. 36 hours later. So, let me see if I get this straight, Laforgue said, arms crossed over his chest as he eyed the nearly finished device the doctor was fussing over. The holodeck was bare at the moment, except for a single workbench in the center of the room. Over the past day and a half, various tools and devices, ranging from handheld to massive structures, had filled the chamber, offering a variety of functions, some obvious to the Enterprise's chief engineer, and some quite obscure. At the end of all that work, though, there was the device. The bottom segment of it looked like any piece of Starfleet, burnished gray duranium alloy in a circular base, with a glossy black control pad on one side. The interior was a mess of circuits and even some old-fashioned wiring, a jury-rigged amalgamation of several generations worth of human and Federation technology. The truly alien component was what was locked into the base. What had once been a hunk of dilithium crystal had since metamorphosed due to Dr. Crusher's guided treatment of it. Instead of a smooth, shimmering piece of crystal, it was misshapen, a pale white and orange tiny, covered in numerous tiny pockmarks throughout its surface. To Laforge's visor, the thing looked like quite literally nothing he had ever seen. Your TARDIS doesn't work because it can't draw on energy from our universe, Laforgue started slowly, as if fully expecting to be corrected. And the reason it can't do that is the materials it's constructed from originate from your own universe, and it has a quantum signature that leaves it fundamentally incompatible with this time vortex. Good so far, the doctor chirped distractedly. So this coral-looking stuff, his head tilted as he considered it. Because it's made from raw materials in our universe, it'll draw the necessary power, and let your TARDIS do whatever it is your TARDIS does. In theory, the doctor chirped. Truth be told, never attempted it before, never had the chance. Dunno if anyone ever has. Without your replicators, your dilithium crystals, I wouldn't have been able to jury-rig something to draw on its own supply of fuel. And let me tell you, last thing I want to do is go giving it my life force again. Blasé as I acted the first time, that's an absurdly risky thing to be tossing around. Now, because a TARDIS is grown from a species of pseudo-coral, I had hoped to find perhaps a planet with a similar supply, but, lacking that, I decided that it would be close enough to use a fifth-dimension crystal lattice and make some very, very minor tweaks to its molecular makeup. Aren't you worried you're revealing the deep, dark secrets of time travel to me? Laforgue asked slowly, brow lifting. Well, let me put it this way, the doctor chirped, clasping Laforge's shoulder with one hand and giving him a winning smile. If you can deduce the complexities and inner workings of a TARDIS, from development to operation, based entirely upon the words, "she's grown from a sort of coral," then you most absolutely deserve a TARDIS. But I'm not necessarily holding my breath. In all honesty, there are quicker, easier, if somewhat less effective, less accurate and far more risky means to achieve time travel. According to your historical database, your Federation's even figured out a few. We don't monopolize the concept, we just happen to find the most stylish way of going about it. Laforgue couldn't help but grin at that, but before he could continue the conversation, a repressed yawn pushed at him, his jaw straining and shifting as he tried desperately not to give in and let it out. Even though he was certain he'd repressed it completely, the doctor didn't even have to look at him to notice, and the Time Lord's tongue, tsked, lightly. Oh, go to sleep already, he scolded, grinning. You've been up for over 30 hours, which is very impressive for a human, but I promise I won't leave without saying goodbye first. All that's really left now is some fine-tuning and tests before I plug this lovely thing in. So go. Rest. Laforgue started to protest, but it was cut off by another yawn, and so he had little choice but to surrender, laughing softly as he picked up his PADD. All right, I'll go lie down for a few hours, but you'd better not do anything really, really exciting without me, all right? I shall do my very, very best, the doctor replied, hunched over the device. But since excitement has a habit of finding me, I can make no promises. We'll see. Chuckling, Geordi rubbed at his jaw, starting to move towards the exit. Good night, Doc. Once the holodeck doors had shut behind Laforgue, the doctor drew a deep breath, eyes narrowing. He'd actually been waiting for the chief engineer to depart for some time, though it wasn't because he didn't enjoy the man's company. He had a sharp mind, incredibly so, and the Time Lord had actually been careful not to be too liberal with the flow of information, but something had been bothering the back of his mind for some time, and he'd wanted some privacy to confirm it. "Computer," he called out, "create a data display on the far wall, and access the historical data I was reading earlier, change search parameters to between the mid-20th and mid-21st century. Chronological order, usual rate." The far wall of the holodeck shimmered, a massive monitor appearing. A moment later, a series of news clipping, historical files and other bits of information began to flit on the screen at a quick pace. Though nowhere near the rate a certain android officer could absorb information, it still passed by far more rapidly than any human could track, dozens of incident reports and articles passing within minutes. At first, the doctor only paid it brief attention, keeping an eye on them as he continued to tinker with his newest little toy, but as time passed, his work on it began to slow, and then stop, until his full attention was locked on the display. With every minute that passed, his expression grew more grim, his eyes more troubled. His fingers began to tighten around the edges of the workbench, and his lips pursed, weight shifting restlessly from foot to foot. He was feeling trapped, cramped. He needed to get out of this room, get some air. Here he was on a starship, wanting some fresh air. No, not that. He wanted to be closer to the stars. Dash 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 dash. As it turned out, the place to find that view was a lounge the computer had called 10 Forward. The doctor had found it quickly enough, the single security officer who had stood guard over the holodeck escorting him there, before leaving him to go to the bar. Appreciative of the privacy, the doctor was quick to claim a table closest to the vast windows, hoping that maybe if he let himself get lost in that view he could get his mind off the troubling things he'd dug up. But that didn't last. He had brought a PADD with him, containing the same information he'd been reading earlier. And as much as he wanted to drink in the starscape, his gaze gradually dropped to the electronic device, until he was just as immersed in it as he had been on the holodeck. So focused was he even lost track of the passage of time. Yet another first. "Hello there." It wasn't until the voice sounded that the doctor realized someone had even approached his table. Glancing up, startled, the Time Lord frowned a little at the dark-skinned woman dressed in blue, sweeping robes and a truly enviable hat to boot. Clearing his throat, he licked his lips and glanced about the room briefly, as if hoping she were maybe talking to someone else. No such luck. The lounge was almost deserted. "Hello." The Time Lord wanted to say he was busy, wanted to ask her to leave, but, well, he was a guest. "I'm the doctor." "So I've heard," the woman replied. "Pleased to meet you. I'm Guinan." "Guinan," the doctor echoed, then frowned. "You're not on the crew roster. What is it you do here?" "Well, I guess you could say I'm the hostess," she replied, hands vanishing in the voluminous sleeves of her robe as she sat across from him, leaning forward and lowering her voice to a conspiratorial murmur. "I serve drinks, tend the bar, and I listen. And I have to say, in all the time I've done it, I've ever seen someone with so much to hear that's been heard by so few. I thought maybe you had some things you would like to get off your chest." "Get some things off my chest, you say?" The Time Lord muttered, returning his attention pointedly to the PADD with a snort. "Do you have a few hundred years?" "I think I could spare the time," she replied, deadpanned. The doctor's eyes flickered upwards at that, startled, then they narrowed just a little, as if staring past her, through her, into something only he could see. That she wasn't human was only a mild surprise to him, and the fact that her race wasn't familiar to him wasn't a surprise at all. What did catch his interest was that, from her, he felt something that he hadn't felt in countless years. A kinship. A corner of his mouth quirked upwards in a small, sad smile. "Very old, very wise. Very kind, and very lonely," she finished, the very same smile mirrored on her own face. "Somehow you seemed familiar." The doctor's arms folded across his chest as he leaned back in his seat, considering her for a long moment before asking, "I don't suppose you're a Time Lord that forgot to stare into the untempered schism?" "I'm afraid not," she replied. "I don't suppose you're an El-Orion with a few redundant organs." He actually chuckled at that, for a moment, a good, cleansing laugh under his breath. "No, I doubt it. Though with these alternate universes, who can say for sure? We could be fifth cousins, 30 times removed." Guinan smiled, then gestured to the pad he held, brow furrowing with curiosity. Most people come in here for the view, so what is it that's has you so fascinated this past hour that your gaze hasn't wandered? Historical information, the doctor replied, waving the pad slightly and trying not to show he was surprised how much time had passed. On this United Federation of Planets, and on Earth's development between the 20th century and current times. I had hoped that I could isolate a point that would have told me where your universe differentiated from mine, but there are too many unexplained variables in this galaxy alone. For one thing, no signs of the Sontarans, the Daleks, not even any mention of Silurians, and they were Earth's original occupants. Instead, there are species I have never heard any hint of, others that seem almost parodies of threats from my universe. Don't get me started on the Borg, for instance. Suggesting the differences happened long ago, Guinan replied, untold eons. Yes, and once my TARDIS is operational, I intend to pop over then and see what's what, the doctor muttered. Until then, I've been restricting my attention to Earth herself, and I'm, if anything, all the more troubled. What have you found? My handiwork, he replied. Well, the other me. This universe is me. Guinan's brow arched. So this universe has a doctor, then. Strange there's no records or stories that made it to public consciousness. Actually, the Time Lord replied, a bit grimly, I think the term is, had. This universe, had, a doctor. I see evidence of some interventions, disasters averted. Some of them I remember quite clearly from my universe, others just seem like something I would have done. But too few of them. At a certain point in my own personal timeline, one I have yet to pinpoint, there's nothing. It is difficult to tell when, of course, with time being rewritten again, and again, but sometime in my past, this doctor simply seemed to vanish. Perhaps he died, perhaps he decided to stop interfering in humanity's affairs, but for whatever reason, the Earth was bereft of a doctor, and yet. You're almost disappointed to see that humanity's done well for itself without him, Guinan finished for him. Without you. Not disappointed, I'm not quite that monstrous, the doctor replied a bit wryly, then shrugged, leaning back, ruffling his hair, and then leaning forward, an elbow resting on the table as the other hand gestured emphatically. But it does make me wonder if at some point all my cavorting about, trying to keep the Earth from being blown to dust, held the planet back, in a sense. Kept it from developing as it should have, standing on its own 2 feet. This Third World War I read about was a terrible, terrible tragedy, something I probably would have prevented entirely, had I been there. Aren't you just a little full of yourself? Guinan interjected softly. The doctor's brow crooked, a wan smile crossing his face. Am I? Guinan considered that, then shook her head, teeth flashing in a smile. On second thought, maybe not. Yes, well, what if I had succeeded in stopping the Third World War? The doctor threw up his hands. There possibly wouldn't have been a first warp flight, no first contact, no Federation. Humanity would have continued to plod along in a state of tension and infighting, and I probably would have ended up having to save them from the Romulans next. And then the Klingons, the Borg, countless threats, countless invasions I would have done everything to prevent. And in so doing, denied humanity the opportunity to learn from each experience, from each loss, and grow as a people. This Federation is the very epitome of what I dreamed humanity would become, a dream they so often seemed just short of reaching, because, perhaps, of me. Perhaps, Guinan replied agreeably, her eyes narrowing a little. So what's kept you from giving them a chance? Honestly. The Time Lord frowned pensively. Fear of failure. Yours, or theirs. Aren't they one and the same? The doctor's chuckle was very quiet, very tired. Mine, as a result of theirs, what happens if I give them free rein, count upon them to save themselves, and they can't? What if the next big threat I refuse to interfere in wipes them out? What if yet another race, because of me, is scattered into oblivion? Another. Guinan echoed. The doctor fell silent, head bowing, jaw tight. It was the same wall that he had erected when Counselor Troy has pushed at that painful spot, an evasion. The Betazoid had changed topics, not wanting to alienate him. The El-Orion simply watched him, for a long moment, head tilted as if hearing something without overt sound. And then, after the long silence stretched into full minutes, Guinan spoke again, her voice soft, gentle. Captain Picard and I have been friends for quite some time. We confide in each other. A few years ago, he spoke to me of a being the Enterprise had encountered, living in a destroyed colony. It looked human, at first, but it proved to be a creature of incredible power, great wisdom, and it was a being that had destroyed an entire race, in a moment of anger, an act for which it was wrought with guilt and regret. Somehow, when I look at you, I remember that story. I don't see why. My crime is far worse, the doctor replied, snorting, his eyes dark, only half aware of what he was saying. Lashed out in anger, anyone can do that. Dishes break. Furniture breaks, sometimes people, but always in the heat of the moment. There was no such rage to excuse what I did, no heat. I knew exactly what I was doing, when I did it. I was precise, calculating, and in no way afflicted by anger or disgust, though I well should have been. Worse, by far, was that it wasn't just some race, some strangers on a distant planet far removed from home, it was my race. My planet, my home. It takes something pretty serious to feel that way about your own people, Guinan replied mildly. Something worse to know you should be feeling it, even if you don't. Yes, well, the doctor hesitated, for just a moment, one last niggling barrier keeping his secret safe. Until it gave way, and he let that darkness pour out. They left me little choice, you see. A loathsome plan, made by the Council, in hopes of ending the Great Time War in victory. Only it would have only been victory for us, for our race. Everyone else, enemy, civilian, everything in the universe would have been eradicated to achieve this ultimate victory. And the gain for us, a life of incorporeal existence, as echoes, ghosts, remnants of what once was. The final sanction, he called it, such a soft, clean name for something drenched in so much blood. And so I weighed the options. I looked at the Daleks, beings of pure, genocidal evil, dedicated to the elimination of any life form not itself Dalek. I looked then at my own kind, and could not for the life of me see the difference anymore. It was then that I acted. It was then that I killed them all. The Daleks, the Time Lords, they burned together, bound at the end as brothers by their wretched aims. So much destruction, so much death, all because I tried to do the right thing. The doctor's jaw tightened, because I thought I was righteous. I wonder, did that make me any different than the rest of them? His thoughts were disrupted by the oddest thing, physical contact. Eyes focusing, he saw Guinan's hands resting on his, just the tips of her fingers, pressing lightly against the back of his hand, but something about that gesture was eminently comforting. When he met her gaze, he saw no disgust, no judgment, just quiet acceptance, and it nearly broke his heart. Who can say for sure? Guinan replied, giving a casual shrug. All I do know is that you did what you could, with what you had. Who's to say humans wouldn't have died out if our doctor hadn't been there at least some of the time? Who's to guess which species-ending disasters would have been bearable for them, and which wouldn't? No matter what happened, no matter what it cost, you still did everything you could to protect them. You should remember that, because sooner or later, you're going to come face to face with exactly what you never wanted to become. Oh, the doctor's brow quirked as he tried to snort. What's that? The man who stopped trying. The doctor actually stunned by that, his gaze falling away from the bartender, flicking away as he thought to himself, before sighing softly, climbing to his feet and, for the first time in hours, allowing himself to wince at the aches in his bruised limbs. Thank you for listening, Guinan, but I need to get back to work. Of course, thank you for visiting. Guinan replied, remaining seated as he began to move away, but then she spoke again, stopping him in his tracks. Doctor, can I ask you one last question? Turning towards the El Orion, the Time Lord nodded, face unreadable, anything. Well, your actions destroyed your people to save others. You must have been very lonely, for a very long time afterwards, and I do think a part of you regrets it. So, if you went back to that moment, faced that same decision, knowing all you know, feeling as you do, would you kill them all again? The doctor's lips spread in another sad little smile, and as he turned away to leave once more, he called back over his shoulder. In a heartbeat. Dash 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 dash. So, you spoke with him, then? Guinan smiled a little at the sound of Picard's voice. She knew he was probably keeping tabs on the Time Lord's movements, just as she knew he would be coming down here soon after learning of the man's visit to 10 Forward. Although Counselor Troy was generally the one Picard turned to for counsel, and for good reason, he had certainly learned to appreciate Guinan's particular perceptions, and when she turned to glance at him, she realized he probably needed some advice himself. "I know what you're going to ask me," Guinan said, sighing softly as she got to her feet. "Is he dangerous?" "Yes, more than you could imagine." "Is he a threat to you, this crew?" "No. In fact, from the guilt that's pulling at your brow right now, it looks like we're more a threat to him than he is to us. Care to fill me in?" Picard's mouth thinned a little, but he told her about the communique from Starfleet, the confidential orders, everything. "I won't let it stand," Picard murmured after the story had been concluded, his head shaking. "I'll fight this, Guinan. I won't let them simply abduct him." "You really shouldn't bother." Picard's head snapped up at those words, eyes widening with nothing short of shock. "Beg pardon." "You shouldn't bother," Guinan repeated, waving a hand as she moved to collect a pair of discarded glasses. "It's a waste of your time, Captain, looking out for one alien with an odd box by complaining to people who won't really care." "I would make them care," Picard snapped. "I'm surprised at you, Guinan. I could file a protest, follow the Intrepid back to Earth, take this all the way to the Federation Council if need be. Beat down every door and shake every stodgy, settled desk-bound bureaucrat of an admiral by the lapels until I made them see that what they are doing is fundamentally wrong." "You could, but it wouldn't matter," she continued. "By the time your protests had borne fruit, by the time the Federation Council ruled in your favor, the Doctor would be lost, swallowed up by less than acknowledged elements in Starfleet. You would hear 100 heartfelt apologies, 1,000 expressions of regret for this misunderstanding, this tragedy, but he'd be gone, and you would never, ever find him, at least not until they were done with him and tossed away what was left. They would have what they came for, and nobody would take the blame for it." Picard, who had been shaking his head through most of her speech, found his denials fading as each of her words sunk deeper and deeper into his mind. His expression, which had begun so stony and determined, grew more troubled with each passing moment. By the time she had finished, his head was bowed, his face filled with equal parts anger and dejection. "So," Guinan continued, moving back to the bar, "as much as you want to raise your protests, file your appeals, work through the proper channels with the proper forms, it's all just going to be a pointless waste of time. So, as I said, you really shouldn't bother." Something about her tone tugged at his instincts, and when Picard glanced up, he saw that Guinan was watching him quite intently. "You're right," Picard said, and his confusion was replaced with a spark of understanding. "The proper channels, all of that would be a waste of time and effort. Wouldn't accomplish anything at all. The Jean-Luc Picard I know never wasted his time on something he knew wouldn't work," Guinan said softly. "Even when his instincts as an officer told him it was the only, legitimate, path available to him. And the Federation I first encountered, many, many years ago, would never have met refugees with confinement and interrogation." "Thank you, Guinan." Picard nodded slowly, tugging at his uniform top, eyes glittering with half-formed ideas. "You've given me a lot to think about." "Hey," Guinan shrugged, leaning idly against the bar as she watched the captain stride out, that small, enigmatic smile tugging at her lips. "I'm just trying to save you some time."